Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
Nobody in the Dominion of Chiral had ever seen a species eat its food so calmly while sitting in a prison cell. The guards watched through the barrier field as the alien chewed slowly on the dry ration bar, looked around the bare walls like he was memorizing every crack, and then offered half of what remained to the shaking little creature in the cell beside him. The creature was a juvenile Mirati, barely old enough to speak, separated from its parent during a raid on an unlicensed trade ship. It had been crying for hours until the alien reached through the gap between the barrier panels and held out the broken piece of food. The Mirati stopped crying. It took the food. It ate. And then it pressed itself against the wall closest to the alien and fell asleep. The alien's name was Declan Rowe. He was a cargo hauler from a planet called Earth. He had been moving freight between two stations in neutral space when his navigation system failed and his ship drifted across the border into Dominion territory. That was 19 days ago. Since then, he had been processed, stripped of his belongings, and locked in a detention block beneath the capital city of Ethera. Overseer Feneth handled his case. Feneth was tall, insectoid, with four arms and a voice like grinding metal. He looked at Declan the way someone might look at a piece of broken equipment. The Dominion ran on a simple principle. Every species was ranked by its genetics. The Royal Genomic Authority tested your blood, read your code, and assigned you a tier from 1 to 12. Your tier decided everything: where you could live, what work you could do, whether you were a citizen or property. Declan had no tier. He was unregistered, unranked, and in the Dominion, that meant he was nothing. Feneth assigned him a labor designation and scheduled him for transfer to the deep mines in the northern continent. It was not a question. It was not a conversation. It was just processing. But Declan did something that Feneth had not expected. He did not shout. He did not cry. He did not throw himself against the barrier. He simply looked at Feneth with steady brown eyes and said, "I have the right to a genomic assessment before sentencing. That is your law. I would like to request one." Feneth's mandibles clicked in irritation. The human was correct. It was the law. Every being in the Dominion was entitled to a genetic evaluation before their status was finalized. Most low-tier species never bothered because the result was always the same. But the law was the law, and Feneth could not refuse a direct request without filing an exemption that would take longer than just running the test. He approved the request and sent it to the Royal Genomic Authority. 3 days passed. Declan continued his routine. He woke early. He stretched in his cell, moving through a series of slow, controlled movements that the guards found oddly fascinating. He spoke gently to the Mirati juvenile next door, teaching it a clapping game using the wall between them. He asked the guards their names. Most refused to answer, but one, a younger Shirani soldier named Pol, eventually told him. Declan remembered it. On the fourth day, a technician arrived at the detention block. She was Shirani, slender, with pale gray skin and dark analytical eyes. She carried a sealed collection kit and introduced herself as Analyst Soraya from the Royal Genomic Authority. She was efficient. Blood samples, tissue samples, retinal scans, neuroconductivity readings. She moved through the process like she had done 1,000 times before, which she had. Most unranked aliens score between Tier 8 and Tier 11. She expected this one to be no different. But halfway through the scan, her portable unit flickered. A reading spiked, corrected itself, then spiked again. Soraya frowned and adjusted the calibration. The spike remained. She looked at Declan. He sat patiently on the cell bench, watching her with a quiet expression that carried no hostility. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had accepted his situation but had not surrendered to it. There was a difference, she realized, and it was a difference she had never seen in a detainee before. She packed her kit without a word. Protocol required her to process the samples at the main laboratory before drawing any conclusions. She thanked him for his cooperation, which was something she had never said to a prisoner before and was not sure why she said it now. Declan nodded. "Thank you for coming down here," he said. Soraya paused at the cell door. She almost said something else. Instead, she turned and walked quickly down the corridor, her collection kit held tightly against her chest. Behind her, Declan leaned back against the wall. He could hear the Mirate juvenile tapping on the wall in the rhythm of the clapping game he had taught it. He tapped back. Somewhere above them, in the gleaming white towers of Ithera, Soraya's portable scanner sat at her bag with a reading that should not have been possible. She did not know it yet. She would know it soon. And when she did, everything about the man in that cell, and everything the Dominion believed about the universe, was going to change. But for now, Declan closed his eyes and hummed a song his mother used to sing. The Mirati listened. The guards listened too, though none of them would ever admit it. The Royal Genomic Authority occupied a tower of white stone and living crystal that rose above the center of Ithera like a needle pointed at the sky. Inside its walls, every species in the Dominion had been measured, cataloged, and assigned its place. The system had stood for over 600 years. It had never been wrong. Soraya reached her laboratory on the 42nd floor just after midday. She set Declan samples on the processing table, initiated the sequencing array, and sat down to wait. She expected the full results in about an hour. Routine work. She opened a secondary file to pass the time. The first anomaly appeared in 11 minutes. The sequencing array flagged Declan's immune system as an error, not a weakness, an error. The system could not categorize it because it had never encountered anything like it. His immune cells did not simply attack foreign bodies. They learned. They adapted. They restructured their response in real time, rewriting their own chemical signatures to match new threats within hours. The system tried to classify this as a disease. It was not a disease. It was a weapon built into his blood. Soraya cleared the flag and ran the sequence again. Same result. She leaned forward. She moved to the skeletal analysis. His bone density registered at the extreme upper edge of the measurement scale. His skeleton was not just strong. It was reinforced, layered in a way that distributed impact force across the entire structure. A fall that would shatter a Shirani limb would bruise him. His muscle fibers were next. And here, Soraya stopped breathing for a moment. Every cataloged species in the Dominion had one of two muscle types: endurance fibers for sustained effort, or burst fibers for short explosive power. No species had both. Declan had both. His muscles could sprint and then run for hours afterward. The system flagged this as a second error. She moved deeper. His neurological scan was the worst of all. Most advanced species had specialized brain regions. One cluster for threat detection, another for emotional processing, another for problem solving. Declan's brain did all three simultaneously. It ran threat assessment in the background at all times, like a program that never closed. It processed emotions and calculated solutions at the same moment. The system tried to separate these functions into categories and failed. Soraya pulled up Earth's planetary file. It was thin. Humanity had barely registered on the Dominion's awareness. A minor species on the edge of explored space. The file contained a basic environmental summary compiled by an observation probe decades ago. She read it slowly. Earth was classified as a Class 9 hazard world. The scale only went to 10. The planet had active tectonic plates that split the ground open without warning. Temperature ranges that swung from freezing to boiling, depending on location. Predators in every environment, in the water, on the land, in the air. Electrical storms, flooding, drought, volcanic eruptions. Diseases that mutated faster than most species could develop treatments. Soraya sat back in her chair. She understood now. Declan was not defective. He was not enhanced. He was exactly what a species would become after surviving millions of years on a world that never stopped trying to kill it. Every system in his body was an answer to a threat. His bones were strong because his world broke them. His immune system was adaptive because his world sent new diseases every generation. His brain ran parallel processes because on Earth, the moment you stopped paying attention was the moment something ate you. He was not overbuilt. He was exactly built for a nightmare. She ran the full genomic ranking algorithm. The system processed his complete biological profile against every species in the database and assigned him a tier. Tier 1. Soraya stared at the screen. Tier 1 had only ever been held by the Shirani royal caste and two species that had gone extinct before recorded history. It was the highest biological classification in the Dominion. It meant, in legal terms, that the being was a sovereign equal to the crown. She ran it again. Tier 1 at a third time. Tier 1, does she save the results and lock the file? Then she sat in her chair for a long time, staring at the wall. The implications unfolded in her mind one after another like doors opening onto rooms she did not want to enter. They had imprisoned a Tier 1 being. They had fed him ration bars meant for livestock. They had scheduled him for forced labor in the mines. Under Dominion law, what they had done to Declan Rowe was not detention. It was an act of war against a sovereign equal. And there were more of him. Billions more, according to the planetary file. An entire world of beings built by the most hostile environment the Dominion had ever catalogued. Soraya picked up the secure communicator on her desk. Her hands were steady, even though something inside her chest was not. She connected to the office of Director Halem, head of the Royal Genomic Authority. He answered on the second pulse. Director, Soraya said, I have completed the genomic assessment for the unregistered alien in Detention Block 7. And he is Tier 1, sir. Confirmed 3 times. No error. The line was silent for 6 seconds. Soraya counted them. Give me a channel to the crown, Halem said. Right now. The line went dead. Soraya placed the communicator down and looked at Declan's file on her screen. His identification image stared back at her. Brown eyes, calm face, a small scar on his jaw. An ordinary man from an extraordinary world. She whispered to the empty lab. What are you people? Empress Lyriath had been listening to a trade dispute between 2 planetary governors when the doors of the throne chamber opened without announcement. That alone told her something was very wrong. No one interrupted the Empress. Not unless the Empire was burning. Director Halem walked in flanked by 2 of his senior analysts. His face, usually composed to the point of being unreadable, carried an expression Lyriath had never seen on him before. It was the look of a man who had found something that broke the rules of his entire profession. He bowed. He apologized for the interruption. Then he placed a data tablet on the table in front of her and said, Your Radiance, we have a situation that cannot wait. Lyriath dismissed the governors and summoned her advisory council. General Orith arrived first, his heavy boots echoing through the chamber. High Scholar Nimra came next, moving with the careful grace of someone who spent more time with books than people. Minister Drayan of Internal Affairs followed, already looking annoyed at having his schedule disrupted. Halem presented the findings. He was precise. He walked them through the biological data point by point, the immune system, the bone density, the muscle composition, the neural architecture. He explained what each measurement meant in the context of the ranking system. Then he showed them the final result. Tier 1. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. It was the kind that preceded either a decision or a disaster. General Orith spoke first. Kill him. Quietly. Dispose of the body and seal the records. This never happened. Nimra turned to him with sharp eyes. And when his people come looking for him, what then? They do not know he is here. They will find out. Species at this biological level do not simply lose track of their own. And if they discover we killed one of their citizens after illegally imprisoning him, we will not be dealing with a diplomatic complaint. We will be dealing with a war. Minister Drayan leaned forward. How many of them are there? Halem answered. The planetary file estimates their current population at approximately 8 billion. The number landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. 8 billion Tier 1 organisms. On a single planet. The entire Shirani royal caste numbered less than 40,000. Lyriath raised one hand, and the room went quiet. She looked at Halem. What do we know about their behavior? Not their biology. Their behavior. What do humans do when they are threatened? Halem hesitated. He looked at Nimra. She nodded and pulled up the intelligence file compiled by the Dominion observation probe that had passed through human space decades ago. Nimra read from the file. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. Humans had developed weapons capable of destroying entire cities within the same generation that they discovered the underlying science. They had used those weapons on each other. They had fought wars continuously for their entire recorded history. They had survived at least 5 extinction-level events on their planet and rebuilt their civilization each time. They had taken the most dangerous predators on their world, animals with claws and teeth designed to kill, and turned them into companions that slept in their homes. Nimura closed the file. There is one additional note from the probe's cultural assessment. It says that humans have a concept they call loyalty. The probe's analysis defines it as a voluntary emotional bond that, once formed, causes humans to prioritize the survival of others over their own. The probe could not determine a biological mechanism for this. It appears to be a choice. The room was quiet again. Lyriath stood. She was tall even for a Shirani, and when she stood, the room felt smaller. She walked to the window that overlooked Ithura's skyline, the towers and bridges of an empire that had ruled 400 star systems through the absolute certainty that the Shirani were the highest form of life in existence. "We will release him," she said. "We will extend full diplomatic courtesy. We will offer him passage home and open formal communication with his species." Orith started to object. Lyriath silenced him with a look. "But," she continued, "I want to understand them before he leaves. I want to know what we're dealing with. Not what the ranking system says. What they actually are." She turned to Halem, the analyst who processed his samples. "Soraya. She is now assigned as diplomatic liaison to the human." Halem blinked. "Your Radiance, she is a laboratory technician. She has no diplomatic training. She's the only person in this empire who has looked at what that man is made of. She has more understanding of humans than anyone else we have. Send her." The order was final. Halem bowed and left to deliver the news. That evening, Soraya stood in her small apartment staring at the formal assignment notice on her screen. Diplomatic liaison to guest of the crown. Effective immediately. She was to report to the Imperial Palace at dawn and begin her work with the human. She had spent her entire career in a laboratory. She understood cells and sequences and chemical markers. She did not understand people. She especially did not understand a person whose blood had just rewritten the foundational principles of her civilization. She packed a small bag. She set her alarm. She lay down in bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere beneath the city, in a cell that would be empty by morning, Declan Rowe was teaching the Mirati juvenile how to count to 10 in English. The little creature could already reach 7. The Empire had decided to release its prisoner. Not because it was right, not because it was kind, because it was afraid, and it was right to be. The diplomatic suite had a balcony that overlooked a garden filled with plants Declan had never seen before. Some of them glowed faintly in the evening light. Others moved on their own, turning their broad leaves to follow the warmth of the nearest lamp. He stood at the railing in clean clothes that fit surprisingly well and watched the garden like a man who had not seen anything green in a very long time. 12 hours earlier, he had been in a cell underground. Now he was a guest of the crown. Nobody had explained why the change happened. The guards who escorted him were polite but stiff, and they kept a careful distance, as though he were made of something fragile or something dangerous, and they could not decide which. Soraya arrived the next morning. She wore a formal gray coat over her lab uniform and carried a data tablet like a shield in front of her chest. She introduced herself again, though Declan already remembered her from the cell. He smiled and said, "You are the one who took my blood. I hope you found something interesting." She did not know how to answer that. Over the following days, Soraya watched Declan the way she had spent her career watching samples under magnification. But this time, her subject was alive, unpredictable, and far more complex than anything a scanner could capture. Every morning, he exercised. He used no equipment. He lowered himself to the floor and pushed himself back up, over and over, then held his body rigid in positions that engaged every muscle at once. Soraya quietly calculated the force his limbs were producing during these routines and realized he was generating enough pressure to buckle the reinforced door of his suite. He never tried. He never even looked at the door. He slept 6 hours each night and woke instantly. There was no groggy transition, no slow return to awareness. One moment he was asleep. The next, his eyes were open and sharp. The palace physician noted this with concern. Most Tier 1 species needed 10 to 12 hours of rest and a gradual waking period. Declan seemed to treat sleep like a brief pause rather than a necessity. But the thing that fascinated Soraya most was not his body. It was what he did with his time. Within 3 days, the palace staff had begun to gravitate toward him. A Miradi cleaner named Oba started lingering near his rooms after finishing her work. A Drovani cook named Farid brought him extra portions and stayed to talk. Even Pole, the young guard from the detention block, found excuses to patrol the corridor near Declan's suite more often than his rotation required. Declan remembered all of their names after hearing them once. He asked about their families. He learned phrases in their languages, badly pronounced, but delivered with such sincerity that the staff members laughed and corrected him gently rather than taking offense. Oba taught him how to say good morning in Mirati. Farid showed him which spices were safe for humans. Declan, in return, showed Farid how to fold a dumpling point one afternoon. Soraya found Declan in the palace garden on his knees in the dirt. A section of the irrigation line had cracked, and water was pooling around the roots of a flowering tree. He had taken a thin piece of metal from a broken trellis, bent it into a clamp, wrapped the junction with a strip of fabric torn from a cleaning cloth, and sealed the leak. It was not elegant. It worked perfectly in Owen had asked him to do this. He had simply seen a problem and fixed it, Soraya wrote in her notes that evening. Subject displays a compulsive drive to solve problems in his environment regardless of personal benefit. This does not appear to be trained behavior. It appears to be instinct. She added another line. The genomic ranking system measures biological capacity. It does not measure adaptability, creativity, or the ability to form social bonds across species barriers. If such metrics existed, Subject would exceed Tier 1. On the 7th day, she asked him directly. They were sitting on the balcony, watching the garden glow in the fading light. She had stopped carrying her data tablet like a shield. She held it loosely in her lap now. Are you a soldier, Declan? A leader among your people? He laughed. It was not a bitter laugh or a defensive one. It was the easy, genuine laugh of a man who found the question funny. No, I'm a cargo hauler. I move boxes between stations. I fix things when they break. I am nobody special. Soraya looked at him. She thought about his bone density, his adaptive immune system, his brain that ran threat detection and empathy and problem-solving all at the same time, without rest. She thought about how he had shared his food with a frightened child in a prison cell. She thought about how the palace staff, members of species that had been ranked beneath the Shirani for centuries, trusted him more after 1 week than they trusted their own overseers after a lifetime. She thought, if this is what an ordinary human is, what are the extraordinary ones like? That night, she filed her interim report to the Empress. She filled in every section with careful data. When she reached the summary field at the end, she paused. Then she typed a single recommendation. Recommend full diplomatic contact with humanity. Recommend extreme caution. Recommend we do not give them any reason to come here in force. She submitted the report and closed her tablet. Through the wall, she could hear Declan humming. It was the same song from the detention cell. She did not know what it was, but it sounded like something old and warm, the kind of song someone sings when they're far from home and trying to remember what home feels like. 12 days into his stay at the palace, Declan had settled into something that almost resembled a routine. He woke early, exercised, walked the gardens, talked to whoever would talk to him, and fixed things that were broken. He had repaired a door hinge for Oba, helped Fard reorganize the kitchen storage, and taught 3 of the younger guard a card game using pieces of torn paper because no one could find actual cards. The diplomatic channels with human space were open. A ship was on its way to collect him. 2 more days, and he would be gone. Everything was calm. Everything was handled. Then the eastern wall of the palace exploded inward. The blast knocked Soraya off her feet. She hit the floor of the corridor and slid into the wall, her ears ringing, the air thick with dust and the sharp smell of burned metal. Alarms screamed through the building. Emergency barriers dropped across hallways with heavy metallic crashes. The Purity Accord had been planning this for days. They were a radical faction within the Dominion, loyalists who believed that only Shirani blood deserved the Tier 1 rank. When word leaked that an alien had tested at the highest level, they decided that the alien had to die. If Declan left alive, his existence would prove that the genetic hierarchy was flawed. And if the hierarchy was flawed, everything the Dominion was built on was a lie. Armed insurgents poured through the breach in the Eastern Wing. They wore dark armor and carried military-grade pulse rifles. Palace guards engaged them in the outer corridors, but the Accord fighters were organized and well-equipped. They had inside help. They knew the layout. Declan was in the garden when the explosion came. He felt it through his feet before he heard it, the deep vibration of a structure taking damage. He was moving before the sound reached his ears. Soraya found him 30 seconds later, or rather, he found her. He appeared at the end of the corridor where she had fallen, grabbed her arm, pulled her upright, and pushed her behind a stone column in a single smooth motion. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. She was trembling, but in tact point 2, Accord soldiers turned the corner. They saw Declan and raised their weapons. Soraya froze. She had never been in combat. She had never even seen a weapon fired outside of training simulations. Declan moved, but he did not move with supernatural speed. He moved with the speed of a body that had been built by a world where hesitation meant death. He shoved Soraya down behind a stone planter, stepped sideways as the first shot burned through the air where his chest had been a heartbeat before, and closed the distance to the nearest soldier in 3 steps. He had picked up a gardening stake from the planter, a thin metal rod meant for supporting climbing vines. He struck the first soldier's wrist with it, a single sharp blow that hit the nerve cluster and sent the rifle clattering to the floor. He caught the weapon before it landed, spun it, and fired a stunned burst into the second soldier's chest. Both were down in under 4 seconds. Neither was dead. Soraya stared at him from behind the planter. Declan looked back at her, breathing hard but controlled. He checked the corridor in both directions. Then he offered her his hand. "We need to move. There will be more." What happened next would later be reconstructed from security footage and the accounts of 17 witnesses. Declan moved through the palace corridors, not like a soldier clearing a building, but like a shepherd gathering a scattered flock. He found Oba hiding in a supply closet, pulled her out gently, and kept her behind him. He found Farid crouched behind an overturned table in the kitchen and told him to follow. He found 2 junior servants trapped in a room with a jammed door and kicked it open with a single strike that bent the locking mechanism inward. He carried a wounded guard over his shoulder for an entire corridor. The guard was Paul. He was conscious and kept saying that he could walk. Declan did not put him down. He gathered 11 people and brought them to an interior room with thick walls and only one entrance. He organized a barricade using furniture, broken shelving, and a heavy metal cabinet that he dragged across the floor alone. Then he stood in the doorway and waited. When 4 Accord fighters reached the room, they found a human standing in their path with no weapon and no armor. Behind him, a collection of servants, staff, and 1 wounded guard huddled together. Declan spoke in broken Shirani. The words were clumsy and mispronounced, but everyone understood them. "Only servants here. You want to fight? You fight me first." The fighters hesitated. Something in the way the human stood, the absolute stillness of him, the way his eyes tracked all 4 of them simultaneously without blinking, made them pause just long enough. Palace reinforcements arrived from the western corridor. The Accord fighters were surrounded and taken down. It was over. Soraya found Declan afterward, sitting on the floor against the corridor wall. His left arm had a deep gash from shrapnel, and blood, red, startlingly red, ran down to his wrist. He was already tearing a strip of fabric from his shirt to bandage it. She knelt beside him. Her voice was unsteady. "Why did you do that? You could have hidden. You owe these people nothing. They imprisoned you." Declan looked at her. His face was tired and pale, but his eyes were the same steady brown she remembered from the detention cell. "They were scared," he said. "I was not going to walk past that." Soraya sat beside him on the floor. She did not say anything else. Neither did he. They sat in the silence of a building that was still settling after violence. And for the first time since she had drawn his blood in that underground cell, Soraya understood that no ranking system in the universe would ever be enough to measure what a human was. 3 days after the attack, the throne room of the Dominion of Shiral was repaired enough to hold a formal audience. The scorch marks had been scrubbed from the walls. The shattered windows had been replaced. But the cracks in the floor remained, thin lines running through the polished stone like reminders that some damage goes deeper than the surface. Empress Lyriath stood before a throne rather than sitting on it. It was a choice that every person in the room noticed. Standing meant she was speaking not as a ruler delivering a decree, but as one individual addressing another. Declan walked in wearing the same simple clothes the palace had given him on his first day as a guest. His left arm was bandaged. He had refused the healer's offer to accelerate the repair. He said he preferred to let it heal on its own. The Shirani physicians did not understand this. Soraya, standing quietly near the far wall, did. He was not being stubborn. He was being human. His body knew how to fix itself. He trusted it. Lyriath spoke first. She was direct, which Soraya had learned was unusual for the Empress in public settings. She acknowledged what had been done to Declan. She used the word wrong. She did not soften it with political language or bury it under formalities. She said the Dominion had imprisoned a sovereign equal, treated him as property, and failed to recognize what he was. She offered formal reparations, wealth, a private vessel, a permanent diplomatic channel between the Dominion and human space. Declan listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he thanked her. Then he declined the wealth and the ship that he asked for 3 things instead. First, he asked about the Mirati juvenile from the detention cell. He gave the cell number from memory. He asked that the child be found and reunited with its parent. He said the child could count to 7 in English and deserved to go home. Second, he asked that the palace staff who had stayed at their post during the attack receive formal recognition. He named them. Oba, the Mirati cleaner who had pressed herself against his back during the barricade and handed him tools without being asked. Farid, the Drovani cook who had carried water to the wounded while the fighting was still going on. Pol, the young guard who had taken a pulse round to the shoulder and still tried to stand up to fight. Third, he asked the Empress to reconsider the ranking system. He did not ask her to destroy it. He understood it was the foundation of her civilization, and he was not arrogant enough to tell another species how to run their world. But he said something that would be repeated in the halls of the Genomic Authority for years afterward. The bravest people I met in this palace were not Tier 1. They were the ones your system ranked at the bottom. They stayed when they could have run. They helped when no one ordered them to. If your system cannot see that, then it is not measuring what matters. Lyriath did not respond immediately. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once and said she would take his words under consideration. From the Empress of Shiral, that was not a dismissal. It was a promise. The audience ended. The formal record was sealed. Declan was escorted to the docking platform on the upper level of the palace where a human diplomatic vessel had arrived that morning. Soraya walked with him. She had been granted permission to accompany him to the dock as his liaison, but the truth was that no one had tried to stop her, and she had not asked. She simply walked beside him, and the guards let her through. The human ship was smaller than she expected. It was battered, patched in several places, and looked like it had been through more than a few rough journeys. The hatch opened, and 3 humans stepped out in worn flight suits. They were loud. They grinned. One of them grabbed Declan by the shoulders and shook him like he was testing whether he was real. Another handed him something wrapped in foil. "Brought you a sandwich," the woman said. "Ham and cheese. The good bread, not the station stuff." Declan took it and held it like it was something precious. Soraya watched them. She watched how they stood close together, how they touched each other's arms and shoulders without thinking, how they laughed at things that were not funny to anyone else. She watched the ease of it, the warmth, the bond that had no rank and no tier and no system behind it. Just people who were glad to see each other. Declan turned to her before he boarded. He looked at her the same way he had looked at her in the detention cell, in the garden, in the corridor after the attack. Steady, present, kind. "Thank you, Soraya," he said. "You were the first person here who looked at me and saw a person instead of a specimen. I will not forget that." She wanted to say something important, something that matched the weight of what had happened. Instead, she said, You changed how I see everything." He smiled. Then he walked up the ramp and into the ship. The hatch closed. The engines hummed. The vessel lifted, turned toward the open sky, and was gone. Soraya stood on the platform until she could no longer see it. Then she went back inside, took the long walk through the palace corridors, and returned to the Royal Genomic Authority. She sat down at her workstation, opened a new file, and began to type. The file was titled, "Proposal for Revision of the Tier Classification System, Incorporating Non-Biological Metrics of Species Value." Somewhere between Ethera and Earth, Declan Rowe unwrapped his sandwich, leaned back in a borrowed seat, and fell asleep in 4 minutes. Because humans could sleep anywhere, even after everything, even between worlds. It was perhaps the most human thing about him.